Rick Carter is a production designer, tasked with creating the worlds for many classic films, including Jurassic Park, the Back to the Future sequels, Castaway, AI, Artificial Intelligence, Avatar, Star Wars The Force Awakens, and more. He is still out on force today with new projects such as the film adaptation of Wicked and Steven Spielberg's The Fabelmans. Rick joins me, Derrick Davis, in a discussion that touches upon several of his films, but more importantly, a look into his wonderful insight that helped shape them. In another interview, you said that despite having been through a lot, you haven't fundamentally lost your innocence or your desire to wear your heart on your sleeve. And that is what cinema's life of exploration has provided. And, I, like many others, also wear my heart on my sleeve. And I'm often told that it is a weakness. But looking at your life and its success, it clearly isn't. So what would you say to those people that criticize such a quality?
Well, it's an interesting dynamic because I had such a singularly fortunate experience thus far. So even just the idea of wearing your heart on your sleeve right now, you see that the paint on my hands.
Yeah.
This is because I just was spending the day down creating some art with a group of people for a show that I hope to have open down in the El Segundo Museum of Art in May. And, getting your hands in there when you're painting, and I'm very organic, you can see even from the things behind that. My personal art form is painting, and it's people. It's just faces. It's not backgrounds or worlds. So I have always held on to that as a process that is personal to me. It also reflects my right eye, which is my nearsighted eye, whereas my left eye is my farsighted eye, and they don't look together. So I have a natural kind of gap in my perception, which is why I even think in terms of minding the gap, which is in between these two types of perceptions. I am getting to your question because where's your heart in relationship to what you see, who you are, and then how you present yourself in the world? I really didn't put my heart on my sleeve entirely because I had my part of my heart in my personal painting that I was just doing. So I had a place, it's like the Beatles when they say there's a place where you can go, and since I grew up with them, and particularly influenced by John Lennon, I maintained the idea of having a place to go because I know being in Hollywood or being in a collaborative medium, particularly, like filmmaking as it is, it can be very rough with, on your egos and on your heart, because you may not get received for the things that you want. It's very competitive. Lots of people have very big egos. They come at you from all different angles. My experience was so fortunate because meeting Steven relatively early, it was Goonies. So I was 34 in 1984. And then I met him, and I was working with Michael Riva, who was a wonderful production designer, just a little bit older than I was. And he took me under his wing in a kind of conceptual way. It was not like working with my father. It was like just working with an older brother. And we just, we were two kids in a candy store, and they didn't know what we were doing. And that's when I met Steven and Kathy. And then they liked what we were doing. And then they liked the way I was presenting them the sets that when Michael wasn't there a few times. And so they asked me to do the amazing stories. There is something that was like-minded with Steven and with Kathy, particularly Steven, of course, in that we understood and have over the years understood there's a deficit that we're working off of that creates the strength, if you can really accept it. The idea that you actually don't know. If you know, when you read about Steven, you'll hear him say, and he says far more now than he used to, that if it's not a project that he's afraid of, he doesn't know quite how to do it, because it actually is to overcome the fear that he picks the project. He doesn't now pick things that are just easy for him to do. And as you get older, nothing gets really easier in that way. It just becomes your stick, you know, and then people are on your stick and they don't really like it anymore. So I guess what I'm getting at is I think we both connected on that level, and where I could go with him and some of the people that he's surrounded himself with or attracted to, Stan Winston or Dennis Muren or Michael Lantieri or John Bell, any of these very talented people, they don't know it all. In fact, none of the directors that I've worked with, Bob Zemeckis and Jim Cameron, even Jim Cameron, he would think, well, he knows it all. He just tells everyone what to do. And he does, up to a point. There's a lot he doesn't know. And he uses the process of making a movie to find out. I mean, that's so he's got his heart in his sleeve too, because, you know, he can be very defensive and very almost like Quaritch, but he can also be like Nate Terry. That's Jim. Whereas Steven, you know, he's learned to be pretty comfortable in his skin, except for that he has these primal fears. And that's every one of his movies is about dealing with a primal fear. So I think I picked up on that. And because I was a traveler who'd been out in the world quite a bit, I was able to bring back things to both Steven and Bob that they had not experienced necessarily. Like I was out in the world as a young man, traveling around the world on a real identity quest. So traveling meant it wasn't just being a tourist. It's like, who am I here? And so that's the way I absorbed places. So then when I started to create places, it was from a real place. So that's where my heart has always been, in the people, the dichotomy that I have between my two types of vision. And that vulnerability then forces me to dig deeper into not only what I have to give, but to rely on other people. So then my ability and my need for collaboration is intrinsic in how I approach what I do. And I've, in this industry, been able to surround myself, because of the projects and the directors, with such good people. And those people, they get it too. And then they start taking on whatever the thing is that they're doing, and they own it, and they bring themselves to it, which then makes me much better at what I'm doing as a sort of coordinator of all of that, or the conductor. But it's not as though I then play all those instruments that I'm conducting all that well. That's my long-winded way of not quite answering your question in terms of what I would say to somebody who's criticizing that as a weakness. What I would say is, yes, it is a weakness, but that's not the end of the story. The ... is that every single great filmmaker is working off of a weakness, because if it was a strength, then they would have nothing to relate to the audience about. How would they know how to tell a story about any concern that then the person who's watching gets caught up in the drama as though something's at stake and they're vulnerable? Because you're playing with the heart, not just the mind when you're watching a movie. If it's all mind, that's a tough one. You know, you have to find something that engages the emotion, because that's where that kind of gap between an audience and what's on the screen, you know, if you think about where is a movie even playing, is it on the screen, or is it in someone's head, or somewhere in between, or all three? And that kind of an idea is what I've been able to explore, and was given the permission with Steven and then Bob Zemeckis, who is a like-minded person. So the two of them, for me, I was like the middle brother. You know, I'm younger than Steven and older than Bob. And that allowed me a lot of freedom to develop. So this weakness was not always used against me because I was screwing up whatever I might screw up, which I did numerous times. So, but they never then beat me up over it. So I got to build up for 20 years, you know, from age 35 from Goonies to basically 55 before I even went out from them into, Avatar with Jim and that kind of thing, because that's a different game when you have to go from place to place, person to person, approval, this, that, and you're never going to be a person for all directors, all seasons, all concepts, all audiences. So that weakness that you're talking about is ultimately the thing that can become the strength. I'm not saying it always is, but so the only thing I would say is be careful if you really only perceive strengths, because you can run out of those and find that you then have no training for dealing with the fact that you're not in your comfort zone. And particularly if you're out there in front with it as a director or anything like that, because the audiences, they get used to you real quickly. And that's why you can have one or two hits or whatever, but if you want to last for a few decades, you have to reinvent yourself each time. And that's what people are doing, at least people I've worked with.
And I really do relate to that. Like, even I actually wrote like my own novel, and I really challenged myself with like things that I'm uncomfortable with, like, certain emotions, like kind of darker emotions, and, loss that I've had, kind of challenge that and kind of see like, what is the essence of like why you feel this way? Like, why can't you get over, someone that you've lost in your life? And what good does it do for you to mourn over, a person when it ends up just, hurting yourself and people that are still around you? So I challenge that kind of stuff, like in my book. But anyway, I mean, that's how I related, to what you said and to how you feel about it. Cause like, you do have to challenge yourself, because the story has to have that kind of personal growth to it.
So, I mean, not all do, but I think and sometimes it's the things that eat at you that you can't get over that are the things that become the baseline of why you're even doing it, the purposefulness that you have with it. I mean, it's a delicate balance when your art can become a source of your frustration to the extent that it keeps you from enjoying your life in the present tense with whatever your situation is, with whatever those alive relationships are. But grieving takes on many, many dimensions, and it's not fooled by your mind, and it's not even fooled by, even your heart can't really rush the process. Sometimes an insight can offer up an avenue of how to look at it, so that when you're triggering certain emotions, that you say, well, I know where these go, and it's not that good for me to stay there. I'm going to actually listen to this voice and not do that. But as I said with Stephen, fear motivates him. So, basically, I wrote it to him the other day, and just about taking any doubts and using them as fuel. And he said, I absolutely agree that's, we talk philosophically sometimes, but it's also based on emotions about things that you are not resolved with, but can you use them in a way that can you know yourself enough so that you know what makes you function better than that which doesn't?
Yeah.
And so each person's individual in that way. So I can't really tell you, it's good or bad, but I hear that it's a real place, and then that's the reason for why you would, be interested in certain things, and then maybe even fixate on certain things. So, just as a mirror back, the question really probably for you, not that you have to answer that in this conversation, but would be, why are you so interested in Jurassic Park or dinosaurs? I see the one even behind you in your head. What do you think they represent to you? Because, for instance, I'm not a dinosaur nut. In the sense that I don't obsess, I never did, but I certainly appreciate them. And I'm the one who came up with the line that Jeff Goldblum says that Ellie has the topper, but which was, thinking about Jurassic Park in a big context. I was thinking, okay, well, God created dinosaurs, then God destroyed dinosaurs, right? Then God creates man creates dinosaurs, then dinosaurs maybe challenge man and destroy man. And of course, and then, and then Laura Dern said, and, women inherit the earth. They're like, nothing wrong with that equation. So she pulled it out but the whole setup was how profound is this story? Because it's dealing in such a big, like us as the dominant species challenged by another. And by the way, all those others that are being created are all female.
Mm-hmm.
Which it's hard to sort of look at a T-Rex and think female and raptor and female, but it's right there. And it courses through, and the whole way that life finds a way is all based upon, the DNA being female, but then amphibian DNA being laced in there. And it's asexual. So that allows them and life to find a way. So it's interesting philosophical as an exploration that these movies get into. And of course, then there's all the technical things you have to do to, and then the CG, my God, to invent that and make that actually work. And then let's say for Phil Tippett to, have to see his whole way of doing things become extinct, except that, you see, what he then learned was that what he was doing was not the modality or the process. Because he was the guy who was the raptors and the T-Rex. He was the one who, this is how they would behave. This is what they would think about. So it was actually my idea that had the idea of, could a raptor perceive opening a door? And then what a raptor could not perceive would be a mirror. So a reflection, in that kitchen scene, the raptor would think that's where she is, which, so we were all in a dance as to what would be the consciousness of the dinosaurs from their world now transported into our world.
Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, you have to make it be more than just about, oh, there's a cool dinosaur on the screen. Like it's not just the there it is factor. It's like what is the motivations, or like what makes them real for the audience, right? And I think you guys did an amazing job for that, and not to like personify them, not to make them be, like a character, but an actual animal with its own instincts. That's what I love about, the original films, especially, is that they really focused on that. But of course, like you said, to reinvent, the sequels, they have to change it up a bit and maybe go in the stranger directions.
Yeah, I think they've had to, in order to, address what are the next implications. That's where Colin has taken it, and he was such a fan of the first ones, and I was there when he first came in, and it was very inspiring to see him take on what had been and then try to bring it into a next level, as a younger person do. So, as you get older, it's good to have younger people pick up on what you're doing, even if they don't do it the way you would do it, because usually to some degree we've run our course with it a little bit, and whatever we would do with it might really just be another retread of the same levels. We might not know it, but I think younger people would pick up on it. Okay, I get where this has to go. Whereas I think Jurassic World, for instance, I don't think people really know where it's going to go. It's quite where it'll go, and I have some awareness of it. And I have a protege who was the designer of it. So it's been fun for me to see it move on beyond me, and then see it still have some vibrancy in the culture.
Yeah, I mean, it's tapped into a whole new audience too, like people that had never even seen Jurassic Park before. That was their first, Jurassic World was. But to at least still have, your DNA, so to put it, in the new movies, it's still really, really great. And I love that you were still a visual consultant for Jurassic World, because it definitely did still have, the feelings and the remnants, and even the literal remnants of like the old visitor center, for example, just to see that again.
I got to be there to help work that out. In fact, I scouted it, scouted the location and all that kind of stuff. And then I was able to hand it off to Ed Verreau, who I'd worked with, of course, on Back to the Future. In fact, I got him into the union as an art director, and we go way back. So, and then Kevin Jenkins, who's doing the newest Jurassic World, was the co-designer on the last Star Wars. So there's been a kind of a handoff, like a generational handoff that I've been trying to be a part of, be as graceful as I can and as helpful as I can. And also because that way, maybe there's some way for some of it to live on. It's a very specific epoch of films, I think, as it turns out. You don't know it when you're in it, but I can pretty much see it now. I mean, from the Back to the Future through to where we are now, it's kind of, through the Star Wars, the ones that we did, with the Force and all of that, to Jurassic World and maybe Avatar 2 and 3. That's kind of a type of movie that has it's very much, from my perspective, something that's come out of the late 1960s in questing for a transcendental experience. And so the journeys that you go on, and most of the movies I've been on are journeys where you really travel somewhere. And then you reach kind of an epiphany, and then there's a kind of catharsis, and it kind of takes you back to where you started, though not always fully resolved, but enough so that there's a kind of a purposefulness that I think this generation, all the way through, Zemeckis and Cameron and even JJ a little bit, or to a great extent actually, have tried to make movies along those lines. Whereas there's plenty of movies now that are moving in other directions beyond that, where you don't have quite the same need or desire to identify the kind of catharsis that you might get from having, something revealed to you through the movie. And it hopefully impacts you personally. It's a different language. I mean, each generation has its own, language. So you don't really want to repeat what came before. So,
because unless people connect to it, right? I mean, that's when there's a new audience that's kind of merging in. So yeah, it kind of has to go along with it. Kind of like how films like in the 50s had a very different feel and very different messages, for that audience, and obviously they could still be enjoyed today, but it's like, it still just had a very different message, if you will.
Or the 60s, and then the late 60s into the early 70s, and all those slices of life kinds of movies, and how at the time they were like, wow, that's so cool. It's not so Hollywood and resolved and 3-act structure and all that stuff. And now a lot of them, you just look at and go, yeah, but so what? What happened?
Yeah.
And some of them hold up, and I started with kind of the, Hal Ashby movies because I was coming from sort of being a hippie. And I find it fascinating to kind of see what is it that people they gravitate towards, where they just instinctively go, well, that's not just that it's cool, meaning cool as the word that means that's not just interesting, that's provocative, and I like that idea of that setup, particularly if you put it in that person's hands. And and you can hear a lot of grumbling, like from our generation, kind of like, like, why don't they like that, that kind of thing, and it's because it's old. I mean, Billy Wilder didn't get to make a movie the last 15 years of his life. I mean, just because times had changed.
Yeah.
And you think, and you look back on some of the movies he made, you go, wow, those really hold up. I mean, he's got 8 or 10 movies that actually just really hold up. And I'm not saying for every young person, but I'm just saying it's what, when you get older, you don't want to have happen.
When you were around 20, you traveled around the world for a whole year by yourself. And like, what inspired that massive journey, especially at such a young age? And like, how did it feel for you after you went through it?
At the time, it was, like going into exile, because it was, the Vietnam War was happening. I was a conscientious objector. I'd been up at Berkeley. And I really felt I couldn't access who I was. I just couldn't. I was just socially determined. That's all I could say, it's not unlike a lot of people today feel, where, the labels are so intense, whatever the color of your skin, your sex, anything, that, like, who are you? And are you really just the sum of that? That's it. And that was happening not only in the main culture, but then the counterculture. And so it's like, where do you go? And especially up at Berkeley, it was so intense with the rioting and everything that looking back on it, I just think I couldn't handle it. And then I got the opportunity with a high draft number from a bingo draft lottery that they had in 1969. So it didn't look like I would get drafted. And I had been a student, so I dropped out of college, and I had some money that my parents had given me. In those days, it was like they literally said, we spent $3,000 on you last year, and here's $3,000. You can do what you want with it. And so I dropped out of college, and I've turned that $3,000 into, well, certainly 3 million. I mean, by now. But I mean, in terms of its impact on my life, the money I've made because of having done that, the vistas that opened up, just even reaching going on a journey. I know what it is to go on a journey and reach the end and then come home. And I brought that whole sensibility into every movie I've worked on. And then, of all crazy things, if you think about the movies that I've worked on, they're all journeys, and I didn't pick them. I didn't write them. You saw the only one I kind of wrote at all, any version of, which was just, you start somewhere, you go on a journey, and where you are determines the drama that unfolds. And then there's often guides and that come along, and in one way or another, and many of them are so classical, like certainly Avatar and Polar Express and Star Wars and BFG. I mean, there's so many that are so classical within the context of The Wizard of Oz, which is what I grew up with. So I'm essentially, Dorothy, and I was a Dorothy in my mind. And when you're 20 years old, you can't walk around very easily and go, well, I'm Dorothy. I mean, that has a lot of connotations and lots of levels, but that was all I'm trying to get at. Is I'm a traveler. I learned from being away, and I went all around the world, and I met lots of people. I didn't take a camera, so I have like 3 or 4 photos of the whole thing. But I continued to travel on my own at various times in my life, and then through my work. And that's been the fundamental thing that I draw upon in order to design movies. Because I'm not a designer naturally, like architecturally, here's an assignment, think about it this way, and like an architect would. I think about it, where am I? What's the spirit of the place I'm in? What am I trying to experience here? What am I experiencing here? What's the drama? And from there, and particularly in the conversation with the director, find out what I think metaphorically these places mean. And then that's all based upon the travels, because I didn't know who I was. So every place I went mattered to me because it was a revelation, who I met, how I felt. Did I stay? Did I go? Did I move on? And so that was a fundamental experience that I had. But then, of course, I could bring that to the table with these directors who had really always just, particularly Stephen and Bob, from the time at early age, they knew what they wanted to do. I didn't know what I wanted to do or who I was. They knew. So they were into it, but then they missed that whole discovery part. So I think that's why they liked me being around. In fact, the latest movie that I just did last year with Stephen, The Fablemans, is about his growing up. So that's where we really parallel. I'm younger, but still I know that world a bit, and then what he was doing with his art, why he was doing it, what led him to be a filmmaker, what are the things. And when you see that movie, it might make you feel a little more like, oh, I get it. These films come from somewhere. They're not just like an arbitrary, oh, I like war movies, or oh, I like this. They come from somewhere. And that's why the directors bring themselves to it. If you see Jim Cameron's movies and you realize that he can be Neytiri and Navi and Ewa, and he can be Quaritch and all that firepower. And he loves both of those things, and they are at war, right? And but that's why the movies are so strong, because he invests in both sides. He doesn't show his hand ahead of time and go, well, I'll make these bad guys, but really, you don't have to regard them because you know they're bad. Because he loves the bad side just as much as he loves the other. So now the movies he's working it out. But he's also willing in real life to go work it out at the bottom of the real ocean and get real messages from real places, real things he sees, and bring it back. Which is how he comes up with the bioluminescent level. What he calls phantasmagoric. It's like as seen in a dream state. He knows I've never seen that. You've never seen that. But just he brings it to us, right? And in 3D, not even a 3D that comes out at you, but an immersive 3D, because he calculates, but he also calculates in order to try to have other people see what he sees or feel what he feels. And that's what they all do. That's what all the great directors are doing.
Yeah. No, and that totally makes sense. I mean, that's what leaves a lasting impact. That's the difference between a movie that stays with you and a movie that you forget about after you see it, even if you had a good time with it. So I mean, those are the kind of stories that resonate with me. Movies like, for me, one of really underrated Spielberg film for me is Artificial Intelligence. And that movie just, oh God, it just like tears me up.
Well, that's probably because you love your mother, or you loved your mother.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what that's about. And so that's true for Stanley, and it's true for Steven.
Yeah.
Right. And they're doing a dance. I mean, Steven's taking on from Stanley and bringing his heart to it. And when you see the Fabelmans, you'll understand even more.
Yeah, can't wait.
and we shared that. We shared that throughout. So the fourth act to me is like, that was Stanley's. That's not Steven. Steven would never go to a fourth act. But the fourth act, you have to go to, because that's the legacy. And the legacy is beyond the here and now, which is the 3-act structure. And then Stanley he's the only director I know of who got to direct a movie after he was dead.
Pretty much, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the fourth act. And then Steven's getting all the stuff from all the critics for having put a fourth act in there, when the fourth act is the very point of the movie, because it's a fourth act point of view for the whole movie, which is Stanley's. I mean, let's just say you're an artist and you want to live on, and you plant a seed with this kid, and he ends up doing it so that after you're gone, it gets fulfilled. Nobody picks up on that. They just don't. Maybe they'll graduate, but no one says Stanley Kubrick what a relationship he must have had with his mother.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Look at George Lucas. What kind of relationship did he have with his father?
Yeah. Yeah.
And only the people that, JJ and Ryan, and they get that, it's about the trouble with the father.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, otherwise you got a good uncle, Obi-Wan Kenobi, but the father is like, fuck. Excuse my language. But I mean, but the mother, if it's focused on, is there as the support. So then that way you can feel where the love flows in the movies. And I agree with you about AI. I mean, I know it's unwieldy, but it gets into so many levels that are profound at a philosophical point of view to feel. I mean, the amount that movie is ahead of what we are able to mostly perceive is quite phenomenal to me, because first of all, the concept is pre-digital. So the future it's not about digital. It's about the future. It's about artificial intelligence. It's about how, right? It's about how does this thing that we've created, this verb of intelligence, start to have its own life form, meaning it will protect itself at all costs. And if in 2001, the problem is that they can't afford to be wrong ever, because that's existentially a problem. But that's a 4-act structure in that movie, of course.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, was it To Infinity and Beyond? That's the last chapter, the Buzz Lightyear thing, we call it now, but that's what's in that movie. And the point I'm making is that 4th act describes, almost by definition, I think in a Kubrickian way, what it is to see what we do here perceived in one more dimension in time, which is the legacy time. So when little David is at the bottom of the water, the ocean, the Ferris wheel, wishing with the blue fairy to become real for 2,000 years, it's like, what?
Yeah.
And then you go into that and you find a whole dimension as to how that artificial intelligence is regarded 2,000 years in the future as special. Why? Because that artificial intelligence had direct contact with the creators. And who are the creators? Us. And what we did is, we did things like, Chris Baker was the illustrator who worked with Stanley, who had so much influence and was so wonderful in that movie. But it's like John Bell in Jurassic or Back to the Future. Just someone who really contributed their heart and their soul and so much to it. But his ability to work with Stanley to conceive how that whole last act with those, everybody thought, well, what are they? They're like, aliens or whatever. And that was a tough one. Right? Like, how do you know how that's supposed to look? But anyway, they were supposed to be robotic. The idea was, how do you show what they're perceiving in David? So what we came up with was, they don't wear their emotions on the inside. They wear them on the outside, which is what you see. That way you can visualize it. They understand what his journey has been.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
There's a lot of things going on in there. I'm not saying they all work, but we're into such rarefied, there's not only no gravity, there's no air, there's nothing. So you're trying to still construct the world and to get to the emotion with the mother having the perfect day, so that the little robot can actually go to sleep and dream.
Yeah.
And be real because he can dream. See, if an artificial intelligence achieves dreaming, then they're as real as we are. And until they do so, they can never be as real, because it'll be a different form of real, but it will never be the one that they were created from.
I see. Yeah.
Because they are our dream.
Mm-hmm.
They are our extension, and they can live maybe beyond when we can.
Yeah.
So that's a tripped out movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
if you don't get it, you're watching the last act going, why is all this happening? Why couldn't we just end at the bottom of the ocean and say the little kid was a robot? I didn't care anyway. So leave him there for all I care.
Yeah, no, I'm honestly glad it didn't end right there at the bottom, because at the bottom of the ocean, because it needed that extra step into that direction, into that future, especially when Jude Law has that line, all that will be left will be us, as in, that's how I always knew they were androids. I knew they weren't aliens, and I was always confused of how did you think they were aliens? They literally say in the movie that line.
Well, because the visuals sometimes are stronger than whatever is said. So for instance, give you an example on how that can work. Think about Jurassic Park. The entire narrative tells you it's a bad idea, but here we are 5 more movies in, and theme parks and a million other things and merchandising galore. So even though the narrative literally says, this is a bad idea, I can't approve this, and Hammond, even in the first movie, agrees. You would think the narrative that they tell you would win out if they tell you, but it doesn't. The experience is more more than, and even just because it gets your heart going.
Especially in Jurassic Park, they definitely don't learn from their mistakes over and over again, but that's just because, people can be greedy, or people can just be too caught up in the wonder and the awe, and that's what drives them. They'll take the risk, they don't care, they just want to make it happen, even if it's not for like monetary value. They're just so want to see it be real. So that's, and I love that that's how it is, because it feels realistic that people keep not learning, because that's how real life can be very often.
Pretty amazing. And yeah, I don't know what to make of that at all.
Right. I know. It's like, I wish
you
could.
I think I used to have a stronger opinion about, what we can learn and what we can't. We're very wired in certain ways. Our curiosities are just astoundingly powerful.
Yeah.
And so that whole thing that Malcolm says of, just because you can do it doesn't mean you should. But very hard, if you can, to stop yourself or to stop someone else, because that comes across as on a whole other level as something that, how do you know?
Yeah.
So, but it's fun to play in that. It's a field to play in, and that's what we've been doing with all these movies.
Yeah, and very well, I might add.
Oh, thank you. But it's really the genius of the storytellers. I mean, Spielberg and Zemeckis and Cameron and J.J. Abrams are such wonderful storytellers that my helping them go places and be places has been a real joy. I mean, that obviously has gotten me high, and while I've had the energy to jump all around, it's been great. It's a little different now. I don't feel quite the same. Just jumping around and continuing. I have a lot of curiosities, a lot of ambitions, but they don't quite go to the same place, if that makes sense. And Stephen it was amazing now in retrospect to have him come in, and he had been in a traffic on Ventura Freeway, coming to work, and he came in one day so excited. He said, "Oh, I know how we can introduce the T-Rex now." And and he had been next to a car that had a boom, deep bass going, and it shook the cup holder he had, the coffee in his cup holder. And he went, "Oh, that's how we should do it." So that's how that happened. The boom, boom. And we didn't know that the dinosaurs could actually be created with the dinosaur, with the CG. So there's a lot of bravura, a lot of Barnum and Bailey, like, here it comes, but we don't really know what's going to be delivered. Luckily it did. But he was so excited because it was so we've been holding back. And then when it comes, it just really came in. And it was amazing to experience that with audiences that first few weeks, because people that hadn't seen anything like it, even Bob Zemeckis, was just, wow. It was like, he had no idea. He had worked a lot in, CG, and, Death Becomes Her and, all that, but nothing like that, what that opened up. So it was very exciting to have that showmanship that Stephen put in based upon not knowing. And I was there also in the meeting when Dennis Muren and Spaz and the main guys who'd worked on the CG, and then to show Stephen the skeleton display running, and then Stephen literally, it was as simple as like, how much to put skin on that? $500,000. Okay, let's do it. And that was coming from him and Kathy, but him particularly. So it was pretty amazing to be in on that meeting. And then, of course, the first screening of that, I was there when we saw it for the first time, like the T-Rex kind of lumbering, it was fantastic. I mean, and of course that led to, Phil, seeing his whole world go extinct,
I know,
which was
poor guy,
not funny at all.
No.
I mean, really, those stories are real. Nobody could get in touch with them for 10 days.
I don't blame him.
No, I know. It's like you build this level, but then again, that's where Dennis and ILM, but particularly Dennis, he knew he needed not just a bunch of nerds creating a dinosaur. He needed Phil to be the raptors, to be the characters, you know, even if they're going to be animals. I mean, Phil would like literally, you know, in meetings, he'd get kind of nervous, you know, that kind of fidgety, like listening to us talk about, well, you know, Grant and Ellie, they would do this, and Malcolm would do this, and then the dinosaurs would do this, and he just get kind of like a little pissy because he just kind of at certain points go, well, the raptor would do, and then he would like to jump up on a chair and do something, you know. It's like to keep us like, be aware that you're talking about dinosaurs, you know, and like I'm the not just the advocate, I'm going to show you what they're going to do. And when you see those things, you know, when he just had that long stick with the head of a T-Rex showing where it goes in that final shot.
Yeah.
And then Michelangelo, one take, had to just go, you know, boom, 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 boom. There goes the skeletal display, right?
Yeah.
And that all worked. And even the way that movie was made, we were on the main road. It was only, the skeletal display was only designed, the whole visitor center was designed for a raptor attack, you know. And so when Stephen said, the T-Rex is the hero, she's got to come back. And we'd already shot in Hawaii. So I thought, like a really literal art director at that point, because I'm just trying to put one foot in front of the other, you know, I was thinking like, well, how does the T-Rex get in the building? We were already set up, like we know what it, you know, and that's, I mean, but what I said was, how does the T-Rex get in? And then Steven said, yeah, he just went, well, Grant, the kids are backing up, the raptor's coming, this is happening here. And then the raptor jumps in and the T-Rex comes in from the top of the frame. I said,
Top of the frame.
Yeah. You know, it was like one of those stories that I go,
I love it.
Yeah, well, of course.
Yeah.
He's so smart that way.
Yeah. He's like, who cares? It's coming in through the frame. Don't need explanation.
Or there was another earlier iteration when he was storyboarding, because when he storyboards, you know, which is not all the time at all, but in those days he was doing more. And it's like he's playing the movie kind of one frame per minute, as opposed to 24 frames per second. So he's just drawing really simple things, this and then this, and then I'll look and say, well, what about maybe this could happen? Oh yeah, that could happen. So he had a T-Rex with a person, you know, like here's the T-Rex. And I remember just laughing. I mean, he was just constructing a sequence. It was like, and I went, well, now what? Because how are you going to get that person out of this situation? And he said, well, I don't know. Because if I knew, then the audience would know that I already know. So at the time, that was, I think about, that was like one of the kids, you know, or maybe Grant and the T-Rex on the main road. But then, you know, he liked that so much. He said, well, I know. What if it's the lawyer? And then he can have his shot, right? Because he can kill the lawyer. And they said, and even better, he can run into an outhouse and we'll get him on the toilet.
I love it.
But it's just that kind of, that's how his brain works. And Bob's that way. He's like the Big Bang Theory personified, you know, as to, you say something and he kind of looks and goes, well, what I thought you were going to say is, and then he comes up with this whole thing. It can go right in the movie. And then you say, well, were you thinking about that before I started talking? I goes, no, just as you were talking.
Nice.
I mean, like Doc Brown, right? It's just like, you know.
Yeah. It is very Doc Brown.
Yeah, very, very, very excitable. And then pinpoint it right into the movie. Because they both have this brain that not only emotionally works for cinema, but it knows how to create cause and effect. And that when they have a cause, they know how to have the affect reverberate, not just like, oh, this, then that happens, or this happens.
The implications.
Like, the implications
yeah.
Become huge cause and effect. And once I got onto that level, I went, oh, that's what's going on. That was a lot of fun for me.
Yeah, no, I love that, especially when it comes almost like a callback type scenario. Maybe not exactly callback, but you know, everything does kind of reverberate from decisions that characters make or things that happen to the characters, you know, kind of put them in more trouble later kind of thing. I love Love doing that to characters. It's so fun. But yeah, no, I love that they're like that. That's amazing.
I mean, particularly at that era, that 20 years, it was just, I mean, because they were just so in their element, and the world was their oyster. I mean,
Yeah.
it was just like no one was touching them. I mean, not that that was about being competitive. It was just more whatever they did turned to gold, and it was pretty neat to be around that.
Yeah, they were able to play in the toy box, and they were allowed to do whatever they wanted with their toys.
The only thing that Bob ever got turned down, well, there's a story, you probably heard it, where Back to the Future 2 was just one movie. 2 and 3 was one movie. Everything from going into the West, it was all in one movie. So when I first heard that from Bob Zemeckis, Bob Gale, it was like getting my brain fried. This was going to be my first movie with them. I'd done Amazing Stories, but it felt so good, right? To imagine, but then wow. And so when they put the budget together, the budget was $70 million. They went to Sid Sheinberg, and Sid said, there's no fucking way I'm going to spend $70 million on a sequel. We spent 35 on the first one, even with the reshoots. And sequels don't make more. So what was Bob Zemeckis' response? Well, then how about 2 for 90? And that's what we did.
Yeah, no worries.
That's I mean, Jeffrey Katzenberg on Roger Rabbit told Bob the budget was at $39 million for Roger Rabbit. And he said, I don't want to see a 4 in front of that budget. Bob said, don't worry, you won't. And it went to 51.
Oh, well, he didn't lie.
He did on Gump.
Oh,
he
no.
actually, yeah, they actually, like, in order to get that made, they had to do a lot. I mean, about the times when Tom and Bob had to give money back in order for us to go to Monument Valley and all those runs. But there were a lot of steps where, in order to get that made, they had to like pretend it was going to cost less. You couldn't read that script for how big it was. It just didn't read big, but it was. And we all, those of us who were on it, especially with Bob, knew it. And, but we believed in it. It was like there was a consciousness there, like a Gumpian consciousness. It's like the consciousness is there's a MacGuffin in that movie, which is that Forrest Gump is stupid. He even says, I may be, I'm not, not a smart man, but I know what love is. And of course, there's even a chart that the teacher shows Sally Field, his mother. Says, here's normal and your son's right here. Now, first of all, they wouldn't have made a chart just for him, right? I mean, but we did, because we wanted to show you. The point was that he was here. The idea is that he's not smart.
Yeah.
But he never does anything stupid.
Exactly.
Because he follows his heart. So it goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning. Is the weakness is the strength. And that's why he can recognize what needs to be done at any given moment, because he follows his heart. And stupid is as stupid does. And
there it is.
There it is. So and reality will judge that.
Yeah.
It'll make it very clear. So reality gets to determine what's stupid.
Yeah.
Based upon what you do. And usually if you're at the wrong end of reality, then that was stupid. I mean, you can fight the good fight all you want, but if it happens over and over again, then maybe you need to change course.
Yeah, exactly. That's when you gotta change it up for sure.
Yeah.
I just love everything you've worked on. That's why I had to bring up AI, and
I appreciate that, because the thing that I was doing to create this hand thing is it's not because I'm trying. I did work on Wicked a little bit for a while, but that's not what this is. No, we're actually going through some of the things. I've always thought about the movies I've gotten to work on with, particularly Stephen and Bob and Jim. Well, actually all of them, and even Zach on Sucker Punches. There's a visual philosophy, and that comes across in the movies. They are very earnest. They're really by people who they're not shucking and jiving and just playing it for the audience because they think the audience needs X, Y, or Z. They're really playing out, and particularly with Bob. Well, actually, all of them. But you can, I mean, you can just where they were in their lives is right what you're looking at. It's pretty astounding, actually. The code, if you know the code of what's going on, and then you see what projects within that period they picked, where it went. I think it's real art. I really do. I know art can be interpreted a lot of different ways, but I think Stephen kind of unleashed something with George that is different than Marty and Francis and all the people. It's totally different because they set up the kind of existential equation that Stephen and George in particular wanted to follow. But both Stephen and George had this kind of pop sensibility and culture that they took seriously growing up. And they didn't really grow up at first. And that's why Stephen was always, labeled as someone who wouldn't grow up. When we were on Goonies, I remember him saying to me, this was like when I was doing second unit with him. And he even then we got along, and he said, they'll never take me seriously, the critics, the way they do, Francis and Marty and Brian De Palma, and because they just can't see it, and eventually, of course, after Schindler's List, everybody said, well, oh God, he's pretty grown up as well. But it's that balance between the innocence, and innocence is not weak. And it's not naivete. It's just preserving something that of the wonder and the real interest in that which helps life find a way. And Bob is that way, and JJ is that way, and Jim Cameron too. I mean, they're really in it for the right reasons, that they sincerely want to communicate where they're coming from, and they're fortunate to not be stuck without a medium in which they can convey that, because otherwise they would have all those ideas and nowhere to put them, or be, all constantly stopped. And that's one of the things that's been so great for me, is to be around their confidence, their vulnerability, their what really makes them tick, and then allow me to have access to my own, but also to help them, so that when I've been working with them, I'm not on it's their agenda, but I don't have a conflict with it, so it becomes my agenda. And if I look at the whole body of work, then it's like I could never figure out what's my aesthetic, in all these movies. But I can see it now. I understand there's a spiritual component, there's a humanist component, there's a certain colors, there's certain ways of looking at things. And most of it goes back to what I experienced in the real world, both as a traveler and somebody who has a near side eye and a far side eye that don't come together. So let's say on Avatar, I don't see 3D. Polar Express, I don't see 3D. BFG, I don't see 3D out here. But I have my own version of 3D. And it's a third eye. It's right in here. And that third eye is where the Avatar state is from. Because where else, you tell me where else it's from. Guy lies down in an MRI machine. They say he's, going to transfer that consciousness into a 9-foot half Navi who's sitting there, and then he transfers, and yellow, blue, red, eyes open. The guy gets up and runs, and the other guy can't run. Then the guy goes all the way to the Hallelujah Mountains in a trailer, and these are big jumps. If I were trying to sell you on the idea, you'd say, well, how are you going to pull that off? And the answer is, you have to believe it. You can't just suspend your disbelief. You have to create an invitation to believe, so you can take the jump. You want to take the jump, and there you are. And it's timeless. It can be anywhere, and it's led to all these movies, and it's led to, Hill Valley in the future, or the West in the past. You can go to Jurassic Park. It can go to a slave ship, finding the Middle Passage that every African American in this country has in their ancestry had to experience. Be on an island, in the middle of the Pacific for no reason. Nothing. He didn't do anything wrong. He just got caught in a plane crash. And then you're even with Claire, with a maniac husband who everybody thinks is great. Like he's Indiana Jones and Han Solo. What could be wrong with him?
Oh, I love that movie. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's amazing to me that after 9/11, the amount of war movies, War of the Worlds, Munich, Avatar, War Horse, Lincoln. I mean, even BFG a little bit, but certainly Star Wars. And then the second Star Wars, even the Vietnam War and the post. It's like every time I turn around since 9/11, I'm on a war movie, and I'm a conscientious objector to war.
Yeah,
so
like, oh man,
go figure.
Yeah.
So these things all they mix up, and for me, they've created a concoction that I could never have predicted, and I'm just glad I got to experience it.
It definitely shows in all the work that you and your teams and the directors have put out. It's like it definitely speaks to people in a way that I feel like is very important and really stays with people and really kind of informs them not only of the people that made these stories, but even themselves in a way. Like they put themselves in the movie because they're allowed that access that you guys create. You allow that kind of entry point into the story. You're not shutting out the audience. You're not trying to just, blow things up for the sake of blowing things up. It's like there's actually a reason there's a connective tissue, if you will. So I think that's why all of these movies speak to me the way they do. They're not just there to give us a good time, even though they do.
The real key to that, and maybe I should leave you on this one, is John Lennon. And it's that line that has always stayed with me, and I think it has to do with the way of breaking down those barriers. It's that I am he, as you are he, as you are me, and we are all together. And if you can actually believe that and act on that, it's amazing what comes out of it. When you're not just territorial, and then that invites in other people to partake, and that just because you're also wanting to partake of them.
Yeah.
And everybody's equal in that. As Lincoln would say, two things equal to the same thing are equal to each other.
Yeah. No, it's brilliant, of course.
Tony Kushner.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But still, yeah, brilliant. Yeah.
But I'm glad we made this happen.
Thank you very much again, Rick. It was great talking to you.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
I'd like to thank Rick Carter for spending his time looking back on his career and allowing us to get a glimpse into who he is. The work that Rick and his teams have put together over the years has undoubtedly helped shape many worlds in cinema that we are fortunate to visit again and again. If you'd like to learn more about the untold stories of Jurassic Park, please visit Jurassic Time, featuring John Hammond's memoir program, Rick Carter's illustrated audio drama, and much more. This has been Derrick Davis.